DAVRA research group with whom we are working on a new commission for the biennial and who will be the next speakers. So DAVRA research group today is represented by Madina Joldybek, Zumrad Mirzalieva and Saodat Ismailova, and their talk will explore the historical connections between inadequate water exploitation and female labor in Soviet-era Central Asia, centered around the Great Fergana Canal and the Cotton Dance Paxta Raqsi. The discussion examines the intentional manipulation of both water resources and women for industrial ends, notably in cotton production. And I found it quite interesting that Fatah Collective was talking about the centrality of land, water, and air to the project of decolonization. And I think also through their way of working, they talked a lot about collectivity, which we will probably continue talking about with DAVRA. So a little bit background about DAVRA. DAVRA Research Group's mission is to connect and develop the Central Asian art scene by fostering dynamic exchanges of experiences and knowledge within the region as a priority. And the group was initiated in 2021 by Saodat Ismailova as an extension of her project Chilltan for Documenta 15. And since then, they have been actively working both in Central Asia and beyond. And some of you who were here yesterday might have heard a few thoughts about DAVRA also from Madina Joldybek during her keynote. And this event today is not only a talk within the symposium, but also the closing event of DAVRA's residency here in Prague. So you will have the great privilege to hear about DAVRA's previous projects, but also about the upcoming work that they are preparing. And now just a few words about each of you individually to make sure that we know who is who. So Zumrad Mirzalieva is a photographer and filmmaker from Uzbekistan. Her documentary short film, Autonomy, was screened at Documenta 15 and the Goist Film Festival Symposium in Wiesbaden. And most recently, her new short documentary, Tashkent 58 to 88, premiered at the Survival Kit 14 Contemporary Festival in Riga. Madina Joldybek is a multidisciplinary artist and educator from Kazakhstan based in London, and her practice revolves around the themes of women's bodily integrity, multidimensional motherhood, decolonization, and authoritarian regimes. And Madina employs various mediums such as illustration, weaving, sculpture, and installation in her work. And last but not least, just a moment, Saodat Ismailova is an Uzbek filmmaker and artist who graduated from Tashkent State Art Institute in Uzbekistan and Le Frenon National Studio of Contemporary Arts in France. Her films and video installations were presented, among others, by the Venice Biennial, Berlinale, Rotterdam International Film Festival, Copenhagen Documentary Festival, and so on.
Well, hello everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here and to listen to the colleagues, and it's always inspiring. Here we are as a DAVRA research group. We are many, but here we are three because the way we work is depends on the project. In fact, we kind of gather together and we say, okay, this is what might happen, and we see who reacts, who connects to the subject, and depending on that, they are the members of the group that get involved, engaged to research and develop and bring it to artistic form. So I would like to say just a couple of words about DAVRA, how it started. I mean, I'm from Uzbekistan, but curiously, I have been making documentaries throughout Central Asia during around 10 years, and by doing and being on the field, there was a point that the borders and this nation definitions start collapsing because of the linguistic, spiritual, cultural common space, landscape. And I start thinking of how in my practice, I just stopped believing into this nation definition, and slowly in my work I start crossing the borders and creating works where I can unite. So probably first work where I did it was Stains of Oxus, where I followed Amudarya river from the glaciers in the Badakhshan mountains in Tajikistan, and I until Aral Sea, so crossing several countries. And for me, it was a kind of an act of being together. So the practice brought me to thinking, you know, like what are these divisions, what are these nation states, and what curiously I see is that by becoming independent, the distances became even bigger among us, and awareness also kind of became not so present. So I thought about creating a group, you know, a group or a space of exchange, a secure space where we can talk to each other and build awareness of each other, which I think is probably essential in Central Asia today. And so DAVRA came more as a reaction to the statement of Erwan Grupa, and also by me thinking about this unification of the region, of how we can speak to each other and do things together. So yes, it was a bit made by hands, DAVRA, you know, I was following them on Instagram, not knowing them in life, because I think that collectives and research groups come, first of all, they grow out of friendship and trust. So it was the other way around. I thought, well, the trust will be built, and then the ones who, if we survive, we survive. If we don't, that's fine, it's an experiment. And so we made, the start was in Documenta, but curiously it continued and it still continues. And I think that it's also important to say that DAVRA, it's not a closed kind of research group or collective, it's an open platform. We want to be connected to more artists and thinkers in the region, and beyond that, that we are tuned and synchronized in the questions we raise or we want to understand. So depending on the projects, the shape of DAVRA changes, so it's kind of a shape-shifting group. And it was, the first project that we did was Chilltan, which was about these shapeshifters, that the space that is not accessible on the first surface. This was also very important because we wanted with DAVRA to question also the definition of Central Asia. As you may know, we were defined by, as a territory, Central Asia. It's still, you know, like always has different type of territorial definition, but it was defined by Humboldt. And so for us it was impossible to think about ourselves without building a conversation with Uyghurs in China, or with the Tatars in the south of Russia, they are there now, or with the Afghans. So it's a kind of a way of a soft power through art, and to tangle and touch these questions that they haunt us. So I will pass the floor to Madina now, so she can speak a bit more about DAVRA.
Yeah, thank you, Saodat. Thank you all for coming here today. And so I guess, yeah, if you want to change
this one, because it's here. Yeah.
Yeah, so as Saodat mentioned, yeah, we started our activities from this summer Chilla, the hottest days of summer, the public program, 41-day public program at Documenta 15 in Friedrichshain Museum. There were a series of public readings, performances, installations, film screenings, and many more. And during our participation with Saodat, Documenta 15, we've created this Chilltan publication, which is a compilation of images and text based on Zoroastrian, Muslim and Buddhist, shamanic beliefs. Yeah, and then after that we've done a mirroring program in Central Asia during like winter chills, and the most coldest time in Central Asia, in Almaty and Tashkent, Dushanbe and Bishkek. So since this year we started this project DAVRA Saodat, which is building like transgenerational and multidisciplinary dialogue among artists from different generations in different countries. So here you can see Saodat herself and Zumrad Mirzalieva, who's an artist from Kazakhstan. And since then we've curated series of film screenings in Go East Film Festival, at the Centre Pompidou, Eye Museum, and many more. Yeah, recently we participated in Contemporary Art Festival, Survival Kit 14. Which was covering the Tashkent African Asian Film Festival, which was happening in
1958 to 1988.
Yeah, and thanks to Catalina Tudy, curator of Biennale Matter of Art 2024, and thanks to Transit, we are participating in this exhibition, and together with Zumrad, we've done residency here, 1 month residency in Prague. And I'm gonna pass mic to Saodat again to talk about the project concept itself, how it started and how it's going on.
Well, this is an image you see by Alena Chermakova, who is a Czech painter, who traveled to Uzbekistan, and in fact our conversation with Katalin started from this painter. And we spent kind of a long time trying to figure out like expectation of Katalin and also the concept of the Biennale and how we can respond. It took a while, but then there were many possibilities, of course, you can develop, and I thought that since Chermakova was the beginning of our conversation, it's good to keep it as a starting point. She has painted like exotic paintings of architecture, Samarkand and embroideries, but as well she painted women working on the fields. And as during the Soviet period there were exchanges between Soviet Communist Bloc, and this is the project of Tashkent 88 also speaks about it on a base of Tashkent International Film Festival of Asia, Africa and Latin America, which was of course a political project that created a conversation between the countries of a global south, but of course with the focus of having an influence of a communist vision. So somehow these projects, I don't see them totally disconnected, and I thought that it's organical, that we stay together with Chermakova, and what is a perspective we can see that we can respond to it. As you may know, Central Asia, especially Uzbekistan, is a second and twice landlocked country. And there is Liechtenstein and Uzbekistan, so we need to cross twice two countries to access to the water. And water issue is really urgent. Like 2 years ago, we had a sensation that it will happen in 5 years or 10 years, but this summer it was already visible, and it was on your body already direct, because there are all the river bodies that totally dried out during summertime, and it already affected like rice cultivation. And we have the two big water bodies, which is Sirdarya and Amudarya, that take their source from the glaciers on the north in the Tian Shan Mountains, and in the south in Pre-Himalayas. And so the glaciers, they melt, and then they create these water bodies that flow to the Aral Sea. And as you know, Aral Sea doesn't exist anymore. Today we call it Aral Desert, Aral-Qum instead of Aral. For us, of course, it was a sea. And the waters were totally disorganized, reorganized, and brought into a new existence by the Soviet project, because there is actually an interesting phrase from the end of 19th century from one of the military generals that wrote when the Russian Empire was expanding to Central Asia, that says the Aral Sea should die as a soldier in a war, you know, so they were quite aware. So it's not that it happened from the 60s, as we know, like thinking it happened because of the Soviet plan of cotton mono cultivation, but actually they were aware of it longer before. So when they were confronted by Turkestan, what do they do with Turkestan? As you spoke earlier today, Russians were scared of India pushing in the north, and they were pushing to the south, so there was this great game. And if you look back again to the text, sometimes there are very interesting sentences related how they have conquered like big cities such as Tashkent, or well, Bukhara was very violent, but I think that yes, it was not a real clear intention of the territory, but it was really the great game of against of the British Empire, you know. So what do you do with this huge territory, which is Turkestan? And back then the cotton was seen as a white gold. So the cultivation of cotton started. So in fact, these two rivers became a sacrifice of this huge economy. So why Chermakovo? And we see there the labor of women. We know for us, when we think about the Soviet period, we really cannot split the policy that happened with women with the policy that happened to the land, or the policy that happened to spiritual spaces of people. Because of course, first they fought against of our religion, the huge repressions, then collectivization. Of course, it affected us differently than nomadic culture. I think with the nomadic culture it was way more violent. But for us, one of the most bloody and violent was the question of emancipation of women. That started in 1928. It's called hujum, an attack from Arabic. I mean, even the word hujum is quite, you know, when you hear it, it's very aggressive. And yesterday evening we were actually saying it's a hujum to water. It's a hujum not only to women, but it's a hujum towards the nature as well, you know, so it happened in parallel. So somehow we build this parallel between historical moment of female, what the Russians would say emancipation, but in fact they needed labor, they needed working force, and reorganization of the rivers. So the project is called Taming Water and Women, and this is like what I'm saying, it's the first introduction, because then we kind of went beyond. We have looked how presence of women were used on the big labor projects such as Fergana Canal, in our case, what we're focusing on, because this is one of the biggest Soviet hydro projects. The Fergana Valley, it's one of the most densely populated regions of Central Asia. That's why it is extremely important part, and when you look at the map, the way the Fergana Valley divided, you will understand that it is important, and they were aware of it, because it's cut in a very complicated way. If you look how Fergana Valley tries to approach Uyghurs in China and the way it was cut, you see there is a planning. And Fergana Valley, they were Isfarak, River and the Chui River coming, they decided to create a canal, and this was kind of this agitation, Agit project, that they built in 45 days, and they also manipulated this tradition of Hashar. Hashar, it's a communal project. It's when we feel that we are together. So, for example, if you need to repair your roof, then we all come together and we do it. And your neighbor cooks, and the other neighbor comes to clean. So it's this communal tradition that we still actually have. And this was used during Hashar as well, but there were hundreds and thousands of people put into this project. And done in 40 days, 350 kilometers with 9 dams. And women, so how women were present at this project by their womanhood. So they were invited to dance to these groups of people, men. Because imagine, so it's a culture where women were veiled, and when you listen to the interviews of women that unveiled, there is a sensation that if somebody from outside would come to me and say, go out topless, that's how I felt. Reading the interviews of women, and there is this beautiful book by Marian Kamp that is called New Women of Uzbekistan, where she worked. She was lucky to come to Uzbekistan in the 90s, so she managed to interview these women. So unveiling. The first unveiling, women not understanding, like being in between traditional society and politics imposed by a stranger. So they were like in the middle of a club, right? So they were the ones, you cannot put your frustration in a religion, you cannot put your frustration into a land because it doesn't respond and doesn't fulfill your frustration, but you can put it onto a woman because you can beat her up, you can kill her, you can, so it's an immediate reaction to the frustration. So I'm gonna keep away Hujum because it's a big story by itself, and let's focus on womanhood and how the womanhood was used. So yes, so the crowds of men going to make this heavy work of creating the Fergana Canal, and women put to entertain them, in fact, by dance. And here comes also the question of a dance. We are a dancing country. Uzbeks, we are sedentary, so we have a big tradition of dance by schools, by regions, and there were not only folk dance, but also court dance, and also dances related to animism, and as music and any art of form, it is alive when it is in its normal environment, especially when it comes to traditional forms. So dance also went through this transformation that it became socialism, somehow. So the dances were put into a grammar, and they were recreated to labor dances. So, for example, Cotton Dance Paxta Dance, and or a dance of a collecting of grapes, or a dance of a woman waiting for a man coming from a field. So all these type of dances. And why this is important for us also, because in Uzbekistan we had this ensemble called Bahar, which means spring, that put together 40 young women, and this orchestration of recreating dances on the base of ideology was something very important in our visual background, because we would see and everybody would speak about them all the time. And again, when you think about it, it's this use of a womanhood and femininity and sensuality for political constructions. So Taming Water and Women, it's a project that we are working on and we are researching, very much based on the archives and also on the books written by researchers. The interesting part of the Soviet period that they created amazing chronicles, film chronicles, and kinojournale that are accessible, and so this is what we are using in our project partly. So speaking about creative part, I'm going to pass it to Zumrad so she can expand it slightly.
Yes, and now I'm going to introduce our project that we are currently working on for the Biennale Matter of Art. So our project aims to look at how the Soviet regime industrialized women through domestication of rivers, of resources, and it was reflected in women's labor, in dance, in the body. It was all reflected in the body of a woman. And this we are presenting in a form of an installation, which consists of 4 main parts. That is a research component made of archival materials that we are able to find. It's mainly photos, extracts from books, newspaper, magazines, videos, some diaries, graphic work, and we're trying to rethink those materials and deconstruct the representation of a woman's body. And the other part is modern day documentary series that I did prior to coming to Prague, and it focuses on the current state of cotton cultivation in Uzbekistan and the legacy of the historical legacy of this industry on women in nowadays, and we are bridging it with the historical context that we are showing in the other parts of our project, so to give this modern day look and link it to what we're talking about in our films and the archive materials. And the third part is films, the moving image, also made from archival footage from Uzbek film archives that are focused on the building of the Fergana Canal, of the Cotton Dance, of the Hujum movement, and all that connects through the main theme of female labor, industrialization of a female body. And the final part is the textile work made by Madina, which also deconstructs the archives and putting it on a blank canvas of aprons that are shown in the photo, which are used by women. And these materials are witnesses of the labor, of the cotton fever, and Madina will be doing some weaving and patterns and graphics on them. And just to give you a better sense of what we presented now, we would like to show just some, these are some of the results of the residency. These are the used aprons that we collected during our field trips. And just to give you a better sense of what we talked about during our presentation, we would like to show you some extracts of the archives that we brought together for this event.
a relatively complex and difficult question, but I'm very curious how you approach it, because it's also something that I think we've been discussing today, but also yesterday. So I have the impression that the strive for political decolonization and also emancipation is a project that is relatively hopeful regarding the future, let's say, or can be a source of political hope. But at the same time, I find it very important what you point to regarding the bodies of water, but also the bodies of women as sacrifice zones, both in historical processes, but also in the contemporary moment, and how you inscribe the historical research into talking about the contemporary moment. So I'm curious how, like, through artistic approaches, but through also very feminist approaches in your work, like how you negotiate this tension between hope and the sacrifice zones, so between I mean the death of also the bodies and of water that you've been talking about.
Well, maybe it's a history that we should deal with, no? To move on. So it's important to try to understand where we are now, how it was all constructed. But for me, it's always important when we speak about DAVRA is that never see ourselves as victims. Not to victimize ourselves. This is essential, and I really believe into that it's all on us. This is really maybe a bit utopic. But I think it's all about trying to work it out on our side. Of course, the discourse is important. We are aware. This actually comes also to the question of the language, because we speak Russian to each other, and within the group we questioned it many times, like, what do we do with this? And I think it's about appropriating, like how you appropriate history and how you appropriate what was given during these 70 years. Because to reverse it, it's clearly no way. Though there was other way of living together before the Soviet Union and the Russians, I was very lucky to. I think that my gaze was shaped by my grandmother and my great-grandfather. They kind of kept me away from the Soviet presence. I'm totally out of it, And I know from them, there was a way of living together with the Kazakhs, Tajiks, because we would know the languages, so we could communicate on our languages, but just understanding each other. When it comes to the question of, I think that the major question is water, and this, how to deal with it. Of course, there is no answer. This is like probably the most disturbing and harming heritage of Central Asia. It's a nation division. I think it's a creation of nations. So the water bodies are divided, the ethnic groups are divided, so there is plenty of reasons for any type of conflict that can be manipulated. But I believe by, as I said in the beginning, by building awareness of each other and of closeness and of a common land, it might be very thin and small and tiny space of hope, but this is the minimum we can do as artists. So I see it like that. Coming to question of women, it is also uncured because the emancipation should have happened through education, but not through violence, because everything that is done through violence, it bleeds, and it bleeds long. It should have happened through education, through a will, like through education, that a woman comes to a will, and she does it through an act of will, unveiling or going to work or going to study. And so this is also a part of our present day, which is lame, the question of education, and I think that if this is not fixed, then history in some weak points can go back and land to it will never land to the same place, but it will land to somewhere that can be filled by what was lost. So I really see, like, for example, what has happened with the religion today, that I see it as it's not related to us at all, you know. So there was vacuum during the Soviet period, and after the collapse of Soviet period, this vacuum was filled very fast, and it was not filled by ourselves, it was filled by other influences. So it is impossible to think about these questions like women or land or the spiritual space, as I spoke in the beginning. That was like the first things the Soviets fought. And it's interesting to see it, for example, through the history of Uzbek cinema, because when you look at the Uzbek cinema, Uzbek Soviet cinema, what the films are about, either women or about national resistance or about spiritual space, no? So it's these major blocks that they explored. So of course it's all interwoven, and we know that we are not, sometimes I joke, I say we're like a Jailo, you know Jailo? Jailo, it's, how do you say it in English, Jailo? It's, you know, when the nomads go and they bring their cattle to a place where there is a green grass so they can eat, and then they go away, and then another cattle comes and eats and goes away. So we are a Jailo, you know, so there is one comes, eats and goes, another comes and eats and go, but we are kind of, by being cat, we don't sprout. So, well, it's maybe, I joke like that, but sometimes I think, yes, we are a big Jailo. And as I said, for me, the only way is to really being aware of us being one solid body as a primary way of creating a safe space.
No, I just wanted to add to your question that I think one of the processes, the first steps of political decolonization or any forms of decolonization is starting from oneself. And in this case, I think sacrifice is inevitable, sacrificing one's language or one's preconceived knowledge. But through this sacrifice, maybe new forms of knowledge or new forms of living may appear, and in this sense, maybe sacrifice is an inevitable step towards true decolonization.
And how we navigate like politics and sacrificing and stuff is just we are like privileged, even though we are called ourselves like DAVRA research group, then we are not like full-scale scholars or researchers. We are like artist researchers who relying on the data, then can like pass through ourselves and imagine our future or different past. So yeah, this is like we have this privilege to do this in imaginary dimension, and also even though emancipation of Truzhnica Vostoka, of this Eastern woman, was quite aggressive and caused much violence. Maybe, yeah, we are so aware of the fact. If it didn't happen, maybe we would not standing here today in front of you. So yeah, this is very complex. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the answer, and I found it interesting that what you said resonated for me with what Joanna was talking about.
So much. I enjoy this so much, thank you. And I have one small observation and a question. The observation comes from the fact that I have a very personal connection to what you were showing, you know, because a lot of this footage comes from Malik Kayumov's films, and it's my mother's uncle, so I know a lot of family stories connected to how he became a filmmaker and how he was learning from this, so to say, Russian/Soviet colonizers how to make movies, right? And it was a very complicated and kind of, you know, confused story at times, because the women's side was one and the men's side was very different. That was an official thing that you can see in how these documentaries are made, but then there was also the unofficial, how he felt about it and what he could tell us at home, let's say, right? And so I was watching and thinking, it's amazing also what you do to it and how you frame it and how you use a different optic of looking at this. Films that were actually the classical documentaries of the early Soviet times about Hujum and about the making of the Karakum Canal and others. Then, of course, I'm also mesmerized with dancing. Because there are so many artists in these post-Soviet countries that deal with it. Like I remember several years ago, there was a project by Taus Makhacheva, Gamsutel, in which she also uses this same движение as you have, because in the Caucasus, the dances were also, the traditional dances were also remade by the Soviet multicultural policies of making up these fake national cultures and identities. Okay, so let's reinvent your traditional dance, and now you will have the brigadier or the tractor driver there, so they would imitate the tractor driver, which was so strange. But she actually used it also in her project, and I see very similar things here. But I have a gender question in connection with that. I'm sure all of you remember the Mark Weil's show, Ecstasy with the Pomegranate in Home Theater, right? The story that they are telling there is that all of these women's dances were actually not women's dances in the beginning, but they were bacha dances. And then some of these movements were used and made and remade, and then made more kind of Soviet-looking, let's say, and acceptable for these grand narratives, like this is a Cotton narrative and this is this narrative and that. So how do you look at it? Do you think it's actually like that, or it's an exaggeration?
There is also a diary of Langston Hughes, the representative of Harlem Renaissance that went to Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan in the 30s. It also was a cotton project because of the cotton cultivation in the States. So there were some black people from the States brought to Central Asia. They wanted to make an exchange. It was actually a project of Moscow, also by that to expand the communism. Well, it's a very interesting diary. I mean, I have a lot of contradictions with it, but it's interesting as a gaze, right? So he writes about that. He apparently met Tamara Hanum and the drum player of Tamara Hanum, which was iconic dancer, traditional dancer from Uzbekistan, of Armenian origins, because the indigenous Uzbek dancers were normally, most of the time, killed for dancing in public. So he speaks about it, that it was male. But I think, from what I think and what I know, because my father also speaks about the boys in red boots that would come to dance in different type of events like weddings or when people, community comes together. I think that the both spaces for dancing existed. It's the visible part in society was the one performed by men, by young men, which was called bacha. Bacha means from Persian a child or a young man, more genderly closer to a male. But it was interesting because bachas, they would dance mostly teenage period, maybe like until 20, let's say. And then they would leave this dancing tradition and they would pick up another type of job and then get married and kind of get integrated into society. So the society was handling this type of presence. When I look also at the diaries, like of Soviet expansion, there is two presences that disappeared for us in our culture is the bachas, so dancers, and the dervish, which are fakirs. so they're gone, it's finished. So to say that the Soviet dance tradition was taken only from a male tradition, I would not say comes only from that, because women would dance, but they would dance in the house, within the house. But in public for entertainment, it was performed by men. So I guess it's a mix of two, but again, I might be wrong.
Yeah, I have a question. In the last time, there are coming works from this area, from this region, from Central Asia and other regions. These works are shown in Western and I just was in New York, also in New York, in the galleries and also in institutions. This is a first good message, but the less good message is that more or very often some of these works the people are receiving or reacting to it like to another exotic image. And you were talking about it. This is the danger, that the people are looking at it like exotic images without really getting the deeper meaning. So my question is how we can avoid it if we are using this kind of images, that it became just another kind of exotic image, and if you have a kind of strategy how you are dealing with it.
Yeah, this is the question we are always ask ourselves, even during, for example, public program in Documenta, when we are doing, for example, collective cooking sessions. So people would say, "Ooh, you're self-exoticizing yourself because you're cooking," but it's, we read, how to say, the previous Documenta was all about collective, and there was a social kitchen, and it was a good idea to remember that all strangers can cook together, unite, and this is what happens every week in our family. So we tell stories and share our experiences and connect to each other. So yeah, we still don't know the answer to this question, but I think the most important thing for all the people who don't know about Central Asia is educate themselves. So and educate about themselves about the colonial theory, at least like the basics. So the case of exoticizing would just disappear, because you know, we just don't dance in front of you, yeah, or don't just show dancing. We reimagining those dances and building artistic parallels, or finding connections. For example, with this case, it was interesting how, for example, in Soviet books, it was ethnographic exotization of Central Asian women, and they look at us like, I don't know, beautiful and yeah, just description only on the beauty itself, and as backward, and they wanted so much to bring culture to us and stuff like that. So yeah, and in this project, the use of women body and rivers are the same, because the nature was uncontrollable. The nature of women and nature of rivers was uncontrollable, because the books, they also, for example, call Siberia River capricious, because the water bank can rise and fell or change direction. So they how to say, they never tried to chance to actually listen to indigenous people and actually see indigenous water irrigation projects that were successfully established and worked there during centuries. So they wanted different scales, and they use the bodies of women and river. So yeah, my long answer is educate yourselves.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think the answer to your question would be that is what decolonization is, because I think the act of seeing someone as exoticizing themselves or self-exoticizing is already a colonial act of itself, because it comes from a Western side of the world claiming that we are not owning what we are doing. And I think what we can do is just to own our culture, own our history, and especially when one sees a woman owning what they've been doing for centuries, it's so easy to claim that it's self-exotization without digging into our own culture and histories. So yeah, I think decolonization and self-exotization, or exotization in general, are two contradicting ideas that I think comes very top down.
I guess it's also kind of very basic, you know, the question of water, the question of environmental crisis, the Soviet past, it touched not only Central Asia, you know, like you are dealing with it being here in Europe. So it depends on which perspective you look. Yes, we are different. Yes, we have a landscape that you have never seen, but it is given like that. Yes, we have different faces. But it's about that again, that the voices, they come from different geographies, and there will be different worlds and languages and sensitivities, and this is again about the question of modernity and colonial past. You know, like there should be one norm, and what about to stepping it out, not only for the stepping it out, but also we are like thinking about these major questions that we are facing today, independently where you come from. Again, it comes to the question of women, our rights, our presence, our voices, sources, natural resources, extraction. Then I think that the question of exotic image kind of becomes a really far away layer. Yeah.
I think this is not just a matter, I think this is quite obvious that, of course, you are dealing with very important subject, the waters, and something very existential, and I think nobody's trying to steal your identity, I think, or the other one. But I think it's maybe more about this, how the means that you use is a lot of this archival material that one can feel like very strong nostalgia, and I think I just wanted to ask if this is something conscious, because I think there is also this, I mean, the whole world is being digitalized, and we are all, you know, many people are using various means in the arts, with 3D, etc. Necessarily doesn't mean that you have to use it, of course, and you can use it and ignore it. But at the same time, I think there is like also this big return with this, there's a big return of, I'd say, like a conservative aesthetics, maybe in a certain way. How do you approach it? Do you have some kind of stance about that, conscious one that you? This nostalgia.
Nostalgia. No, it's really more, as we said already, I think we can go further on and understand the reality we are in by researching and appropriating what has happened. Because this also what was the first rush when we became independent, you know, like let's forget and erase the Soviet past. It was a rush, you know, and so the films are not ever shown, you know, done in the Soviet period. The chronicles, no one goes, they're not even digitized, you know, no one wants even to look at them back. But I think that we had these 30 years of national recreation, going really deep into national heroes, creating national heroes, working like with traditional forms of art, but this period of Soviet time, and we are products of that today, you know, we cannot deny it. It should be rewatched and revisited, so it's more from that perspective.
I saw one more question in the room. I would just like to ask around if there are other questions so we know how many. Okay, so I see two more questions.
So I wanted to ask the questions about the connection between the exploitation of the nature and the womanhood in Uzbekistan, and like move back from this historical context of Uzbekistan and Soviet era. And I was just wondering what was the motivations behind it, like why there is exactly the connection for you that you decided to connect the exploitation of the nature and the womanhood.
Well, I think these are two very interconnected historical periods, as they started simultaneously with women's emancipation, Hujum movement, and with the exploitation of natural resources. More people were needed to work on the canals, on the cotton cultivation, on other agricultural industries. So the exploitation of natural resources and exploitation of women's bodies were just a one process of Soviet colonial project.
And just because there's very important issues, and we need to scream about it. Like I don't know, scholars and professionals like water management and stuff. They say like 30 years later there will be no water. Come on, people, do something about it. But like authorities, they don't do much productive. And also, for example, for me as a feminist artist, as someone who is coming from Kazakhstan, I would say, for example, Hujum and like unveiling and emancipation still have echoes through the generation till nowadays. So modern women in Kazakhstan question themselves: should I do households, or should I make babies, or should I actually pursue my career? And they do all of that, and they still carry like triple burden, and men, for example, not all of the men support and like collaborate on doing this stuff. And for example, I forgot the name of the scholar, after like collapsing Soviet Union, there was a new like era of traditional, like because this hujum and emancipation was so aggressive and was made at once. So after like Soviet Union collapsed, and finally nobody had these norms of like hours of educating yourself, or I don't know, working on for building superpower state of communists and stuff. There was like new waves of neo-traditional as a compensation for this radical intervention.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that. Going back to your question, that if we step away from that historical period and focus on what we have now, and the interlink between women and natural resources, I'd say that water scarcity is first and foremost is affecting women, and women are more vulnerable to the consequences of exploitation of natural resources, water scarcity, and other disasters that come from those processes. So women are the bearers of all the family responsibilities, and water issues are directly affecting their livelihoods.
Well, as I said in the beginning, there is like historical reasons how these two, as the project is called Taming Water and Women, and this happened in history, so it happened as a part of big industrialization and a Soviet project, so it is absolutely interwoven between the extraction, water mismanagement, cotton monoculture, women emancipation. When it comes to dance, it's not a traditional dance, it's actually a perspective of what happened to dance during
Soviet period. So it makes a cycle that might be not very, not immediate for you to grasp it as an outsider, but they are all interconnected.
Thank you so much for the beautiful presentation. You said at the beginning that you stopped believing in nation state and turned into the water as the flowing across. Could you develop on this metaphor, or rather I would have a question, what can we learn from such a river that cuts across many landscapes?
That there is no borders, no? There is no... it's all handmade reality we are in. It's handmade, and I think that it's overlapping over and over this handmade reality by refusing and not trying to, not even looking at what is given, no? And I'm not saying it like in an abstract sense, but very concrete. Landscape, climate, it dictates, it proposes, and there is thousands of years of knowledge that humans have developed by connecting to its environment. And this knowledge is suppressed today. And I think that this is the knowledge we should try to point to. But if we go directly there, it will become exotic. Yeah? So we need to find a way how to deal and how to bring these historical facts and to contextualize and to connect to the reality of the other, parts of the geography, so people can connect and understand. But absolutely, one of my previous focuses was making documentaries, and I think that this is probably the most essential for me, this connection to the land, like in its primary and its most generous, and it's the thing that can really balance. And actually, when we speak about this decolonial perspective, like conferences, like what I would do, I would just take all the DAVRA and go to the land, to land, like land. And this is the most, for me, pure and direct process of reconnecting to yourself.
Thank you so much. I think that was a beautiful closing word, and I hope that everyone can join us next June for the biennial, also to encounter the work you will create. And I neglected to mention in the beginning, so I would like to add that the Biennale Matter of Art is co-curated with Alexei Borisyanok, a curator from Belarus based in Vienna, who is also here with us today. So thank you very much, DAVRA Research Group, and everyone for your attention.